WhiskyJason here, whiskey from the viewpoint of an American over here in Germany, and my slogan today, whiskey is made to be drunk. Now, we drink whiskey. We should not collect whiskey and leave it on the shelf and just adore it like art. It should be consumed sooner or later. That's why from the batch 16 from Glendronach single casks from the year 2018, I actually opened up both of these bottles. Now, I did a bottle share of both. Now, the older one is actually a little bit cheaper than this, 319 euros versus 339 euros. So the Whiskybase numbers, just for those that are keeping track and like to do that. So the 24-year-old is here. We have 107631. The 22-year-old is 107634. Now this is Pedro Ximénez Sherry Puncheon. This is just a sherry butt. In this sherry butt that was 24 years of age, there was 649 bottles. Now, if you do the math, 649 times 0.7, you're going to get a total liquid content of 454.3 liters. My question is, how in all the world did a sherry butt that originally holds 500 liters still have 454 liters after 24 years? Well, the answer is fairly simple. In my opinion, Billy Walker, we'll talk about him in a moment, or I'll talk about the fact that he did not distill this. Neither did the company that actually he bought it from, Chevis Regal, Pernod Ricard. They didn't distill this either. Actually, the company that distilled this is something you may never have ever heard of. He probably just took different casks that were distilled, for example, on the 19th of February, 1993, and filled them into a sherry butt, and then bottled it as a single cask. The law in Scotland says a single cask is the last cask the whiskey was in. They don't care about anything beforehand. You do not have to put on the label finished. It just says here matured in the finest sherry cask. And it's true, it was one cask. Now, before that, it could have been a lot of other casks. And so the cask number 445 was the last cask it was in. Over here, then our nice little Pedro Ximénez. Yeah, it was all from the 27th of September, 1995. And it was in a Pedro Ximénez Sherry Puncheon 4038. And there were actually even more. There was 681 bottles of that. So if we do the same math here, 681 times 0.7, we're actually going to get 476.7 liters. And from a 500-liter Puncheon, usually 500, maybe a little bit more, that's a lot of liquid after 22 years here. All right, so let's go to the history very briefly here at Glendronach. I'm going to pour something, let it set for a tiny little bit, and then talk about this. I did a bottle share. Everything's gone. So this is my little... I actually did 3 CL versions, so I have 2 CLs left. That's me, and the rest of it I shared. So I'm going to make quite a few people happy, and most of the people actually bought 5 CL. Some actually bought 10 CL sets, and some actually, just very few, bought a 3 CL set. So that's good. All right, did you know, and if you've ever been to a tasting with Glendronach, they're going to talk about James Allardyce. He actually founded the distillery in 1826. Well, looky here. What do we have? 1826, all right? So the Glendronach Distillery Company was founded in 1826 by a partnership of farmers headed by the characterful James Allardyce to build and govern the Glendronach Distillery in Forge near Huntly, Forgue. Now, Forge is actually the name of their, is it the 10-year-old or the 8-year-old Glendronach that they originally brought out? Now, Allardyce was a little bit of a character, especially down in Edinburgh, because he would offer drams to the ladies of the night of Canongate. Unfortunately, the distillery burnt down in 1837, and 5 years later, Mr. James Allardyce was bankrupt. Now, the distillery was bought and rebuilt by Walter Scott in 1852, passed on then to John Somerville and Co. in 1887, and following the Great War, which is World War I for us, during which Glendronach fell into government ownership, interesting, the distillery was picked up by Captain Charles Grant. We know the Grant name from Grant Whiskey. We know the Grant from William Grant and Sons. If you've ever had anything here from them, Tullamore Dew, or even here a Glenfiddich. That was actually the youngest son of Glenfiddich founder William Grant, and it was incorporated as the Glendronach Distillery in 1927. Now, this site was passed on to William Teachers and Son in the year 1960. They expanded the distillery from 2 to 4 stills, and Glendronach was a lead component in the blend called Teachers. Now, Teachers became, and this is the important name, actually a subsidiary of Allied Brewers in 1976. Allied Brewers mothballed the distillery Glendronach. William Teacher and Son became a subsidiary of Allied Brewers in 1976, and they actually mothballed the Glendronach distillery in 1996, 20 years later. 6 years, nothing happened at Glendronach. So if you ever see a Glendronach single cask from the year 2000, don't touch it. It's a fake. It's a fraud. Because between 1996 and 2002, nothing happened at the distillery. We all know that there's actually booms and bust periods, and especially in the 80s and even the 90s, there was a bust, and then starting about 2000 up until now, 2025, there's been a boom period. Now we're going back into the bust, and we're going to see some distilleries closing, like, for example, Glenglassaugh has been mothballed here in the end of January 2025. Now, this was made by Allied Brewers. The Allied Breweries, excuse me. Thought that was interesting. Now, there was a lot of different mergers and acquisitions, and Pernod Ricard actually took over the distillery in 2005. Right before that, in the spring of 2025, Glendronach switched from coal-fired to indirect steam heating for their stills. I thought that was amazing. 2005, 20 years ago, they went from coal to indirect steam. So this was made on coal-fired pot stills. Amazing. By Allied Brewers. Never heard of them. Now, Pernod Ricard, Chivas Regal, had the distillery for a total of 3 whole years. They sold it to Benriach Distilling in 2008. And that's the year actually Billy Walker said, hey, let's launch a brand of 12, 15, and 18-year-old whiskeys, even though the distillery was closed between 1996 and 2002. So some of that 12-year-old whiskey was much, much older. Some of the 18-year-old was much, much older. A lot of that 18-year-old whiskey at a certain time in history was much, much older. And even the 21 was much, much older. All right, so 2016, Glendronach was sold to Brown-Forman. So Billy Walker had his greedy little hands on this distillery. I used the word greedy, I'm sorry. On the brand Glendronach for a total of 8 years. By the way, he has owned the Glenallachie distillery even longer than 8 years already. That's crazy, isn't it? We love that era of Glendronach, and Billy Walker distilled basically nothing we ever tasted that he bottled. It was all bottled by someone else. And usually I used to say, hey, it was Pernod Ricard. And it wasn't. It was Allied Breweries, a company I knew very, very little about. All right, so you came here to see Jason taste some fantastically old single cask Glendronachs, and instead you got a history lesson. Is that typical for me? Yes. I'm a teacher at heart. I love educating us about different things. So, this was not made by Brown-Forman. This was not made by Billy Walker. This was not made by Pernod Ricard. This was made by Allied Breweries. Crazy. All right, so let's go to the 24-year-old whiskey first, the sherry cask. Cherry. I get a lot of wood, furniture polish, oak, tobacco. All right, going over here. I'm going to read the label in a second. Oh, this is darker, richer, deeper, more raisins, dates, figs. The 22-year-old is much better than this. There used to be a website. I don't even know if they're still updating this or not. It was called malt-review.com. And they actually talked about, on the March 7th of 2018, the Glendronach batch 16. And they talked about the 15 whiskeys that Billy Walker put out. There was a 28-year-old. There was 3 27-years-old. There was 3 25-year-olds. There was 2 24-year-olds, 2 22-years-olds. And there's that gap. And there was a 15-year-old, 13-year-old, 12-year-old, and 11-year-old. Why? Because nothing was made for those 6 years that distillery was actually mothballed. And so this one over here had a retail price of 205 pounds. This over here had a retail price of 180 pounds. There are people actually trying to sell this now online for 500 plus euros. I think that's a little astronomical, but the average price on the auctions the last couple of years would be about 319, and here about 339 euros. So they have definitely gone up. If you ever looked at the, Billy Walker did a very good job of efficiency. This label here, they just printed this label twice for the bottle and for the box. Everything else is standardized. The back label is standardized. This is standardized. So you just have to you bottle it, you put a label here, you put a label in the box, and everyone's happy. But you want to individualize it, and you have this little neck tag. And on this neck tag of the Glendronach 1993 Cask 445, we have the following nosing notes. It says here, an oak paneled room with baked gingerbread, old brandy, and mulled red wine with chestnuts and game roasted on an open fire. I mean, those are tasting notes. Come on. We don't do tasting. I don't think anyone has ever said game roasted on an open fire on a whiskey before, all right? Over here, we have the Glendronach 1995 Cask 4038. And we have spiced orange and Victorian plums on baked gingerbread with Demerara biscuits at Mocha Coffee. I mean, great, great, great tasting notes, I must admit. And I love the neck here, the neck tag. So I'm going to go over here, taste this one first. All right, we do have an ABV of 52.4. We do have an ABV of 55.1. I'm doing the older one on purpose. Sananja, cheers, people. This is the year my youngest son was born. This is, my son was not even 1 year old when this was actually bottled. Yeah, my youngest son was 4 months old. I was carrying him around on my arm with all his tiny little tummy pains. This is history in a bottle, people. Coal-fired pot stills back then by the Allied breweries. As I say this, the whole time I'm tasting this is a B whiskey, all right? It's great. but it's not perfect. I get a little bit of like a syrup sherry type of artificial sherry moment. I get a lot of wood. I get a lot of furniture polish. I get a little bit of a cherry moment and so on. I don't get anything with game on an open fire. The palate says, sip sherry oils and dates with angelica root and traces of coal dust from an open fire. Savor red wine, chestnut, and pleasant game with lingering traces of licorice and menthol. Awesome tasting notes. Did not get any of that. So, solid B, memory lane. Wow. What a privilege. All right. So, but whiskeys are there to be opened and enjoyed and shared with others. So, this one, only the 22-year-old, but the Pedro Ximénez. 4038, 55.1%. I could swim in this. Oh, this actually smells better than it tastes. I forgot to mention that as well. It's like an A- on the nose, and it's a B on the taste here. Cheers. Wow. 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 I just realized I actually lied. The back is actually a single label as well. It says 1995, cask number 4038 here as well. Shows how well I read the labels beforehand. So, our master distiller specifically selected a handful of individual casks from the warehouse as the Glendronach distillery to be bottled as a Glendronach limited release with maturing whiskeys dating back to as far as 1968. There is a vast selection of barrels, hogsheads, puncheons, and butts to choose from. Each of these casks display truly remarkable characteristics the malt whiskey contained within, having developed exceptionally during the long maturation period process. The Glendronach distillery, forged by Huntley in Scotland. Cool. All right, I did not read the label, but the same label, they just, same stuff here. Wow, that's an A whiskey. I mean, if you've never had the possibility to have an old Glendronach from the 90s, single cask, and you're at a bar and they have something there, or you're at a friend's place and you see it, remind the people whiskey is there to drink. Whiskey is there to enjoy. Whiskey is there not to be looked at like a piece of art. They made this to be enjoyed. And I'm so happy I had the possibility to do this and open these and to share these with my super fans and my friends here in the German community. That is a privilege, and thank you very much, Billy Walker, for bottling these. Thank you very much for all my people who bought the samples for actually enabling me to open these bottles and share them with you. And I hope one day you will actually be able to try something like that. My question of the day is, if you're going to have an old single cask of something, an old whiskey of something, what would you like? Now, Glendronach is hard to beat. Yeah, those batches, there was actually a batch 17, and then I think that was it. But there are some fantastic products out there. So an old single cask, what do you want? Thank you very much for watching, liking, subscribing, telling others, and I will see you back here real soon. Whiskey Jason. Bye-bye.